My friend Samit told me about the event and sent me an email about it, so I subscribed to it. Yeah.
Sure. What do you think about the event today?
I thought it was excellent. I was quite blown away by the speaker. His knowledge. Just the simplicity in his answers as well. He could have gone on for an hour on each answer, but he just kept it concise and simple and excellent.
If there's something you're going to take home, what do you think that one point would be?
I think just try and raise my level of consciousness. Associate with people who are higher spiritual level, and not be affected by what other people are thinking or criticising. And
I think one thing which we can take away is we are so lost into the running around and the fast life, we forget to look back at the basics, something which was always prevalent in this world, about your true identity, about being inward focused and trying to relate at a different level. It's a must for the current state of the world, which is just mired in commotion and running around and rush and mad rush about money and all the problems you see in this world. Yes, certainly.
I really enjoyed it. Bhakti Rasamrita Swami is such an amazing speaker, and I've been to a couple of other corporate Dharma events, and they've all been absolutely incredible. I think it's really great that they kind of encourage people who aren't necessarily into spirituality to come and take a bit of an interest. And he's just very open to answering questions, which is always great. Very approachable, and I guess that's what these kind of events are about. So thoroughly enjoyed it. I think the point he made about association was really important. It's difficult, obviously, because not everyone is like-minded, but it's important to kind of seek out like-minded people. So I'll definitely bear that in mind in the future.
Yeah, I found it really insightful. Coming from a non-religious background, I thought that it really helped me clarify what spirit actually means to me.
Sure.
And I think it was really interesting when questions were allowed to be asked that different people had different ideas about what spirituality means to them.
Sure.
And so it's very interesting talk. So I would love to come to another event next time, so please keep in touch with me.
Okay, cool.
The team that organise these events, they work really hard, and the speakers that they get are phenomenal. The speakers are really in touch with the deeper truths of what reality actually is, and it really does hit home, and it makes you think about your life and what you can do to kind of improve your own life and also try and help improve the lives of others. But I just find that every time I come to one of these events, it just reminds me that okay, I can take that from this particular event and I will try and implement it. And then maybe if I come to a future event, I'll learn something new, and then I can try and implement one thing from that event for a number of days. And hopefully, as time goes on, I just build on different qualities and stuff, and I don't know, try to be a better person. But you can always just try, right?
Oh, it was great. I think some of the things he was saying, I don't personally follow them yet because I'm too human for that. But what he was saying made sense, and it was very calming. I think that stood out.
And if there was something you're going to take home, what do you think that one thing would be?
Probably try and calm my ego down. Yeah. Because I think the industry I work in, it's egos run high, and everyone's trying to protect their turf. I'm going to try. It might work to my corporate disadvantage, but I'm going to try and at least consciously try.
Would you recommend this event to friends?
Absolutely. Yeah. I came here because one of my colleagues brought me here. I'll be coming to the one in September. Apparently there's one, so I'll be coming to that.
First of all, I must say it's very well organized, and I must say that the topic is it's very it's very good actually. It's very topical. It's about identity. A lot of people struggle with identity. What I found very good was that he mentioned things like Facebook and what that kind of let's say impact. Exactly. And you see a lot of people thinking, I've got a lot of friends because I'm on Facebook. Actually, it means the more friends you have on Facebook, the less really friends you have. And in that way, I think he made a very good comparison, saying Facebook is actually faceless. Now, I have my own Facebook page, but I give it a certain place in there, and it's not my Facebook page is not my identity. I've got my own identity, and I think what he tried to bring to people, you have got an identity, and your identity is more than a banker. It's more than a brother, a father. You also have a spiritual identity. I think that's, for me, that was that message. I don't know what other people made of it, but I think if that was the message he tried to give me, it came across very well. I like the plain language he uses, and it's done really well. And of course, the organization is just brilliant.
Would you recommend this event to any of your friends?
Definitely. I'm from City Hindus Network, CHN, and we actually advertise this in our newsletter. And when I heard about it, I said, we have to make sure that our members, we've got a couple of thousand members, and I hope they all walk in here, and I hope that in my way, or sorry, in our way, the City Hindus Network, CHN, has contributed in a big attendance, and I must say, keep up the good work, really good. Thank you so much. Thank you.
I was on Eventbrite just looking for events and came across it and thought I'll give that a go. So that's why I'm here.
And what do you think of today's event?
I've really enjoyed it. It's given me a lot to think about. I think it's one of those events where you go home, you take notes when you're here, you go home, you speak about it with people, you just meet, and it develops.
Sure.
The teachings develop, the principles develop, and then if you're lucky, you get to apply them and live by them. If you continue with it. So yeah, it's beneficial. And I think in this day and age where so many people are lost, it's great to have these events accessible, and free of charge as well, that you can come and find something. Because I think often people look in the wrong places for answers, and that takes you down another path which can be difficult to come back from.
Sure, yeah.
So yeah, I'm appreciative of events like this event. I think it's, for me, kind of knowing where I am and where I need to be. Within the levels, knowing where I am and where I need to be, and it's a journey, and knowing that I can get there and I will get there is that's good for me.
And would you recommend this to any other people?
Yeah, I would definitely. I think that faith-wise, there is something to learn. I think that we were talking about sometimes in society we look at what's different about us rather than what's similar. And I think that, exactly, we do that a lot. And I think that with events like this, that I can come from a different cultural background and still benefit from something because it's similar. It touches not the physical part of me, it touches the soul. And essentially we're all the same. So that's what I think is beneficial in terms of what I've got from it and what others can get from it, even if their cultural background is different, is that it touches your soul, not the external parts of us.
Irrespective of background.
Exactly.
Welcome to Ernst & Young. We'll just wait for it to settle down a bit. So the last time I was standing here, it was 2011, introducing the same speaker that we have today. So I think we're very fortunate to have our guest speaker today. I've spent a bit of time in Asia Pacific in the Far East, working in Hong Kong. So it's been a great journey, both professionally and personally. And it's wonderful to see how this group and this quarterly seminar that we have now has really developed. So thank you all for coming. Something on the topic for today, the Dharma of Identity. I was trying to think about this, and we basically have. So since I was slightly younger, I've had quite an interest in Japanese culture, and the first way that manifest was taking karate classes when I was younger, and more recently other forms of martial arts that are originating from Japan. One of the things that we noticed is the culture, the etiquette, the respect that's there. And I'm really, really fortunate that in Hong Kong, my next door neighbor happens to be Japanese. So I kind of introduced myself, and this Japanese family with two very young daughters, one who's 4 and one who's 3. So I asked the mum, what's the little one's name? And she said, Yazuka. So I said, fine, Yazuka. It's a fairly common name in Japan. And then I heard her call Yazuka, and she said, Yazucha. And I thought, why did she say Yazucha, not ka? And then I asked her afterwards, why do you say Yazucha, not ka? And she said, she's just a baby. She kind of like prefers cute way of saying it, rather than a ka. She prefers a cha. I was like, all right, that's fine, cool. And then I was just playing around, and I took one of her toys and I said, this is now my toy. And she kind of had that look on her face, that it's not, So she looked at me and she said, Tijika. And I was like, she's saying her name. She's basically, that's her way of saying her own name. So I asked her mum and I said, why does she say Tijika? And she said she's basically babyfied it another level. So I was like, that's pretty cute. So I was thinking about it on the way that there's basically the way you say the name, which is Yazuka. And then there's another way which the mum says the name. So this is what other people think that you are, Yazucha. And then there's the baby's way of saying her own name, who she thinks she is. So at that stage, her perception is that her name is Tijika. So I think even in professional life, in personal life, there's kind of these three dynamics that are always coming into play. There's who you are, in essence. There's who you think you are, and there's who others think you are. And a lot of times in the professional world, who you are is determined by what you do, the activities that you do. You're renowned for doing this, or you're renowned for doing that. You've made a brand for yourself. So I think the concept of identity really sort of plays in on all kinds of different levels. And I think the speaker who we have today, I have a tremendous amount of respect for and a great deal of admiration for. Particularly, the series was effectively inaugurated when we had a seminar on how the mighty fall that we've got the DVD for at the back. And the insights on topics and how they link back to our practical applications has been fascinating. So we heard then on decline and how things can take a turn for the worst. And today we're going to be hearing about identity. So a bit more background for those of you who weren't there in 2011, and many of you wouldn't have been. Our speaker today is Bhakti Rasamrita Maharaj, and he started his career way back in India, beginning with an MBA from Mumbai University, going on to a management post at Standard Bank for a good length of time into a management position, and then withdrew from this and began full-time devotional life, or sharing higher values in the places that he visits. Primarily the US, Australia, India, and increasingly more places he's been visiting. So I just want to give a warm welcome to Bhakti Rasamrita Maharaj, and you will join me to do that. So as far as itinerary goes, we're going to have a session for approximately 45 minutes to an hour, which would include the Q&A aspect. And then we'll move on to sort of refreshments and canapes at the back. So things to note, we'll do a few announcements when we finish up, but I'd like to make the stage available for Maharaj. Thank you.
Om Jnana-timirandhasya Jnananjana-shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kada Mahyam Dadati Svapadantikam. Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yutapada Kamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padang Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamscha Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Presthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swamin Niti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Good evening. I'm very happy to be back again after a couple of years for the Corporate Dharma series. Interesting name, incidentally, Corporate Dharma. And every time I come, because the word dharma appears in the title, I feel inclined or interested in trying to elaborate more on what dharma really means, but then it's such a big topic. We can't really do justice to it. And it's also a very interesting topic today, Dharma of Identity. So I'm happy to be amongst all of you once again to share some thoughts on this interesting topic. Probably many of you are attending these series for the first time. Prashant did begin his introduction by talking about identity, and when you talk about who you are and who you think you are and who others think you are. And yes, that's so true, because you can say this one sentence or ask this one question, who are you, in different ways from different platforms. It can be at the most elementary, innocent level, way up to another very aggressive, hostile level. When two people quarrel with each other, one of them may ask the other, who do you think you are? Yes, indeed, what a deep question. And perhaps neither of them understand really how deep the question is. But they're not at that level. They're not coming from that platform. When someone says something unusual, or even if it's something usual, and you want to know, you have the phrase here in England, I believe, I understand where he's coming from, yes? So you don't really mean it in a geographical or spatial sense, that he's coming from another part of England or wherever. What you're talking about is, where is this person coming from in terms of his mind, in terms of his attitudes and his thoughts and his consciousness and so on. So you say, okay, now I know where he's coming from, so that's why I know why he's doing things the way he's doing them. Or you want to know where someone is at. That's another expression you use over here. So you don't use them in a physical sense. What you really want to say is you want to know where that person's mind is. So it's so important. This question of identity is central to our existence, because that's who we are. I mean, you can't try to understand the world around you or relate to the world around you unless you're clear about who you are. So knowledge and everything that's of any use to us begins with us, because I am the person who's trying to relate to the world around me. I am the person who's trying to relate to people, have relationships, accomplish things, and so on. So it's so important that I should know who I am. And yet, this one question is the most perplexing question today. It's such a deep question that has baffled philosophers from time immemorial, and that continues to baffle even scientists and thinkers even in our modern times. Identity. What do we mean by this word identity? We mean the sense I, that I am something, I am somebody. And today we find in the age of increasing globalization, where everything seems to become more homogeneous, where diversity seems to be getting suppressed, and everything is one kind of philosophy that seems to be prevalent everywhere. So people are feeling strange. They're feeling estranged from their own roots and their culture. So you find the struggle for identity manifesting in different ways. So people identify with a certain group, depending on some religious identity, or perhaps a cultural identity, or a social identity, a national identity. So there's various kinds of identities that we create for ourselves because we want that one thing that's identity. When we lose our identity, then we feel lost. So we need a sense of knowing who we are, a sense of identifying ourselves as being something concrete in life, not just as some numbers in a factory or in a place. We have, an identity card that says your number so and so. So let's examine, the question of identity from different platforms. And I'll relate it to the idea of dharma. So let's start with a little bit of dharma. Just a few words on the concept of dharma. The word dharma is a Sanskrit word, a Sanskrit language coming from India, which is formerly prevalent all over the globe actually, which is why you have most languages that have their roots, root words that sound very, very similar to the Sanskrit language. For example, from what I understand, I'm not a linguist, but Lithuanian is one of the languages in the world outside of India that's extremely close to Sanskrit. Amazingly close. Even languages like Russian have so many words in common, exactly in common. So there was a basic conception earlier of this idea of dharma. Dharma means that which sustains in a very deep sense. In a very everyday, commonplace sense, it means our duties, our vocations, our faiths, and so on. So it's a very difficult word to translate precisely in English because it has so many different connotations depending on the context in which you use the term. So anyway, for now, let's understand dharma as being our duty, a very simple kind of understanding. This word, in the Sanskrit language, we have another word which is called sva. Sva means self, which is connected to identity. And when you combine these two words, you have a word called swadharma, which means my personal duty. Now, depending on who I think I am, my duty, my attitudes, my everything will change. So we have our spiritual texts like the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita and so on. And we learn from these texts that the word sva or self or I can be understood at different levels. The Bhagavad Gita tells us that essentially we are spiritual beings. We are spiritual nature, spiritual in essence. And our ultimate and real identity is that we are spiritual beings. And as spiritual beings, our identity transcends all other identities. Identities of nationality, of community, of religious affiliation, of gender and ethnicity, and so on and so forth. So the spiritual identity is our ultimate identity. And this identity is actually what unites the whole world. So this is that one understanding that can actually dissolve all sorts of misunderstandings, conflict, quarrels, and bring about a harmony and love and peace within the world. The understanding of our spiritual identity. But that is something that is not so commonly understood, even by those who are very religious. You see, there's a difference between being religious and being spiritual. You could be religious and not spiritual. And when you are spiritual, you will automatically also be religious because your worldview subsumes the word religious. Religious is something that is incorporated automatically in your worldview, but you have a deeper and a wider understanding of the word religious. Whereas a person who is merely religious and identifies himself or herself as being, let's say, a Christian or a Muslim or a Hindu or a Sikh or a Buddhist or a Jew, and if that's all that person understands religion to be, then that identity is a very restricted identity. And that creates divisions in the world. And the moment you have divisions of this sort, you leave open the doors for conflict. Because there's a difference of what you believe and what I believe. And I believe I'm right, and I believe, therefore, as a natural corollary, that you're wrong, because you don't believe what I believe. Failing to understand that there is a higher perspective which can actually integrate all these worldviews. So our understanding ourselves as spiritual beings is central to our topic, our discussion today. However, that's not all there is to life in the world. We have to eat, we have to sleep, we have to fulfill our bodily necessities. So we do have a bodily identity, don't we? We have men and women here. So that's an identity. Somebody is a lady, somebody is a gentleman. We have different ethnicities present here and everywhere in the world. So there is a difference externally. We can't deny that such differences exist. We have differences in size. Someone's tall, someone's short, someone's slim, someone's not so slim. So on the platform of the body, there's a variety of differences. And for the sake of everyday convenience, we do identify ourselves with these identities. But we know, at least a person in knowledge understands, that behind these external bodily identities, there's a common underlying unity. And at another subtler level, our identities can be in terms of our psychology. You know, let's say all the aggressive people come on one side of the room. All the timid people come on another side of the room. Yeah, okay, you have a division according to some psychological trait. You have some people who get angry very fast and some people who are very equipoised and composed and calm, even in the most troublesome situations. So there's a distinction. There's an identity. There are people who are very angry by nature. There are people who are very calm by nature. So all in all, let's call this our psychophysical nature or our psychophysical identity. So at the grossest level, we distinguish each other on the basis of the external identity. I look this way and you look that way. You look something different. So we distinguish the body on so many different criteria, as I mentioned. However, any civilized and cultured person today knows that there should be no discrimination on that basis. And today, there's such a good understanding of this topic. So it doesn't matter what your bodily identity is, you know, but we are one as human beings. There's that conception that has become more prevalent today in cultured societies. However, from the spiritual point of view, we are urged to rise progressively from the physical conception of identity, which is a gross bodily conception of identity, moving upwards gradually to the psychological conception of identity, and even moving further beyond to the spiritual conception of identity. So that progression is what civilization is all about. So from the spiritual point of view, civilization is not merely about fulfilling the needs of the body. It is not even merely fulfilling our psychological needs, our emotional needs, and so on. The ultimate test of a civilization in human society is the degree to which it has fulfilled our spiritual needs, the degree to which it focuses and re-establishes every individual's spiritual identity regardless of bodily and psychological differences. So it means that any cultured and civilized society from a spiritual point of view would encourage its constituents, its members, to move higher, to a higher stage of consciousness. You know, it's all a matter of consciousness, of how you think and what your attitude is and how you look at others and the world around you. If you're going to make a distinction, let's say, oh, this person is, the color of his skin is just like mine, so we are one. And the other person, his or her color of the skin is different, therefore we are enemies. So that's the lowest level of consciousness. So we make a distinction. Then we come above and say, no, it doesn't matter what the color of our skin is, but you know, we are humans. We should live together and not consider this. All right, so we've come to a higher level of understanding. And then we go higher to understanding that, well, you know, there are even different countries in the world. It doesn't matter, we're all one family. Ultimately, we're all human beings. And a higher state of conception that even the animals and birds, we have to look after them too. It's not just the humans we are responsible for. And then there are the plants, and there's the forests, and there's you know, the atmosphere, the planet, and so on and so forth. So our consciousness expands. So a culture, a spiritually cultured society would facilitate the spiritual evolution of the consciousness of its members. And that is what actually every society's success is measured by, or it should be measured by. In the Vedic literature, the Upanishads, for example, which are highly philosophical texts, and I'm not going to get very, very technically philosophical today, but there are certain very interesting and fascinating concepts which we can call models, if that appeals to everybody today, which are very useful tools for us to analyze the world we live in and use them as tools for self-improvement, to use them as tools for helping others improve, and helping us and others to relate to each other better and to develop personally at every level. There are different models or concepts like this, and today I thought I would talk about one concept. I'll say a few Sanskrit words, but I'll explain them in very simple language too. There is a concept of what's called the koshas. The word kosha in Sanskrit means sheath, S-H-E-A-T-H. The spiritual essence that we all are, the soul, we are covered over by these sheaths. You shouldn't imagine it in necessarily only a physical way, say like an onion skins, you know, you peel off one after the other. Well, it's something like that in a very subtle way, but not quite exactly like that. You have these sheaths, and you act according to, you know, the consciousness that is represented by that particular sheath. The first sheath or stage of consciousness is called Annamaya Kosha. Anna means food, Maya means full of. So in simple words, it means consciousness that is full of food. What does it mean? You don't take it literally. It doesn't mean that there's some sheath inside you that's made of, you know, bread and butter and things like that. But what it does mean is that your consciousness is food, food, food. Where is food? That is the basest level of consciousness. Examine a baby. When a baby encounters something, what's the first thing the baby does with that object? First thing it does is puts it in its mouth, yes? Why? Food. Its consciousness is food. So its whole mentality is everything it gets, it wants to put it in the mouth and eat it. Animals are also like that. They're all the time moving around, sniffing and sniffing, trying to get food. Is it edible? Is it not edible? They understand it by their sharp sense of smell. So in this state of consciousness, one is basically concerned about immediate gratification. I want, period. And if I don't get it, I become very upset. I may throw tantrums. I may get angry. I may shout. I may scream. I quarrel with people. I want it. Why have I not got it? just like a baby, yes? A baby wants something and you don't give the baby something, the baby starts crying and then becomes pacified only when you give the child or give the baby what it wants. But that won't last for long because the baby wants something else again. And if you don't get that, if the baby doesn't get it, it starts crying again. So imagine grown-up babies. Sorry, I don't want to sound harsh, but you know what I mean. Grown-up babies means that they want, period. They want. So that's one level of consciousness. And when they don't get what they want, then they're very, very upset. So basically, that consciousness or that state of mind that wants something immediately, impulsively, whatever it is that seems attractive to the mind at any given point in time, that's what I want. So, and I'm willing to do anything for it. So that is the Annamaya Kosha, Annamaya state of consciousness, the food consciousness, to be very simple. So one is more concerned about everything at this level. One is very self-centered. One is very selfish. I am the center of existence. I am the center of the universe. The universe exists for me, for my gratification. I mean, underlying the psychology and the actions of that person is this principle, that everything exists for me. And therefore, I must become happy. It doesn't matter if others are inconvenienced in the course of my pursuit of happiness. Therefore, you see a baby wakes up in the middle of the night and may scream and cry. The parents don't get sleep. Their sleep is broken and they have a hard time because they have to wake up in the middle of the night to tend to the baby and so on. But the baby doesn't think, oh, I'm troubling them. I'm disturbing their sleep and they'll have a hard time tomorrow. The baby's intelligence isn't evolved enough to accommodate such a considerate conception of life. However, as the baby grows older, of course, the baby's consciousness evolves, expands. Then the baby starts having a broader conception of life. So at this stage, the identity is only centered upon I want food, I want this, and so on. So this is the food consciousness. A little higher, there's another word that's used for the next stage of consciousness. And that's called pranamaya consciousness. The word prana means life air. I'll explain what that means in a moment. Maya means full of. So this is the consciousness of existence, which means that my concern right now is to survive. All I'm worried about is I should survive, I should protect myself and my loved ones, and those I identify with. I need to ensure that my needs are taken care of. I need to provide adequate defenses for myself and my loved ones. The word prana basically is a subtle air within the body, according to the yogic sciences. You see, medical science understands things from a gross point of view. The subtler parts of the human existence are not quite understood by medical science. For example, the mind, the intelligence. Modern medical science doesn't understand these things so much. Modern medical science speaks in terms of brain, not in terms of the mind or the intelligence and so on. Similarly, there's another subtle concept called the prana, life airs. These life airs are very subtle airs that exist within the body. And they are responsible for the functioning of the body and the different systems of the body. The respiratory system, you have a certain prana that does that, the digestive system, excretory system, and so on. So these pranas, they actually regulate the functioning of the different systems in the body. And at the time of death, the pranas, these different life airs, which are very subtle airs, they leave the body. So in other words, existence depends upon or life depends upon the presence of the pranas within the body. And I'll come to the question of a soul a little later. So prana means, for all practical purposes, life and existence. So a person who is in the stage of pranamaya, existence consciousness, is more concerned just about making ends meet, and that person is usually so caught up with the pressing demands of life, just rushing for work. You have to get to the job in time, you got to do a good job, you got to get your promotion, you got to have your savings, you got to go for your weekend for surfing and something else. So you're caught up with just your day-to-day existence. You don't have much time or energy or inclination to think about anything higher. You just want to live comfortably. And in the course of living comfortably, you want to avoid any distress, and you want to increase your pleasure in life. So therefore, our endeavors at this stage of consciousness are basically just to push on life, just survive with minimum distress and maximum pleasure. This is usually the consciousness of the largest number of people, the most common thing we find in the world, where everybody is concerned about my livelihood, my house, my mortgage, you know. So these are the pressing demands of existence in the modern age. So one's identity of oneself is, yes, I need to survive. So the first one is food or eating. The second one is existence and defending. I need to defend myself, protect myself. So a person in the state of consciousness is tensed, is always anxious, is worried, feels threatened. Even in a corporate scenario, there's only a certain number of places available up there, and there's many people who want to be up there. So we feel threatened that if someone else may take my position and may take that position, whereas I may be eased out. So we are threatened always. We feel insecure. And therefore we want to defend our turf, so to speak. So whether at the corporate level, at the domestic level, at the social level, at the international level, this principle functions. Even amongst nations, my nation must survive. Your nation, even if it doesn't survive, I don't mind, but at least mine must survive. So at the individual level and all the way up to the international level, the sense of identity based on fear is also a very predominant identity today. Then let's move ahead. But before that, just a brief word. The first level of food, can be identified with a gross body that's made of flesh and blood and bones and so on. The one that we are so familiar with, that we see. The second one, pranamaya, can be associated with the subtle airs in the body, which is subtler than the gross body. Now we come to a third level of consciousness, from where we have another conception of identity about ourselves. And that's called the manomaya kosha. Mana means the mind. Maya means full of. So consciousness where we're on the platform of the mind. The mind is always feeling, thinking, willing. We experience emotions with our mind. We express ourselves with our mind. So the mind is very, very important for us, because that's the faculty we use to actually perceive things and experience happiness or distress. So when we say that there is the identity on the Manomaya platform, what we are meaning is that we identify ourselves with the mind. So the mind is subtler than the prana, the life airs. I'm speaking yogic terminology now. The mind is so subtle. Even the prana is something you can't feel, and the mind is even subtler than that. How many of you are familiar with alternative medical therapies like, let's say, acupuncture? Have you heard of these things? Many of you are familiar. Or even yoga. I'm sure all of you have heard of yoga. Pranayam, have you heard breathing techniques? So what do? They essentially regulate the subtle airs through the gross airs. You know, the air we breathe is gross air. And then there are subtle airs in the body. So by pranayam, by yoga breathing techniques, what you do is you regulate those subtle airs within the body. And therefore you become healthy. Because according to yoga theory, everything is a matter of balance. If the life airs within your body are balanced, then you're healthy. If there's some imbalance somewhere, then it manifests in some disease related to whatever organ or system that is deficient. So the subtle airs, the prana, you balance them by the process of breathing and so on. Even acupuncture, what they do is a Chinese system. Ultimately, originally everything was one. Over a period of time, historically, everything became divided as this country or that civilization and so on. Before that, it was, global. We had a period of globalization that is quite unthinkable for people in the modern era of globalization. There was another era of globalization earlier. So the acupuncture specialist, he puts in these needles into your skin and certain meridians where the prana flows in the body. And the prana cannot be seen like, it's not a physical thing like blood flowing through veins. But these are very subtle channels of flow of the subtle air. Even though it can't be perceived, but we can understand its actions by its effects. And the mind is even subtler than that. So when you're on the platform of emotions, then you're said to be, or the mind, then you're said to be in the manomaya state of consciousness. Where now you're thinking of yourself in terms of the mind, or even acquiring knowledge. You're trying to understand the world around you, trying to figure out things. And then you move on to the higher level, the fourth level, which is called Vijnanamaya Kosha. Vigyan means science, which means that the knowledge that you've acquired in the previous state of consciousness, now you have to realize it practically or actually experience it. So when you've experienced that, that's called realized knowledge. Let's say you have a cake or a pastry. Now, you may know the theoretical way of how the cake is cooked. And maybe you're a good baker too, and you know how to bake a good cake. But if you haven't tasted it, you won't really know what a cake is. So having a theoretical understanding of what a cake is and how to cook it is well and good, but knowing what a cake tastes is the perfection of your knowledge of the cake. So similarly, whatever knowledge is acquired, especially when it comes to understanding your spiritual identity, your knowledge in the manomaya stage starts rising. It's also called the jnanamaya stage. Jnana means knowledge. So this is a stage you're trying to inquire about your identity, really, beyond the physical and the psychological attributes. You're thinking, I'm going for my job, I'm earning money, and I have relationships, and I have all these things. But is that all that life is all about? Is there something more to life than all this? What is the purpose of creation? You start asking these questions. Why am I alive? What is the purpose of existence? So far I've been so concerned about existing. But what exactly is the purpose of it all? When you start questioning that, That is when you come to the Manomaya Jnanamaya platform, and when you realize your spiritual identity, at least preliminarily, you're on the 4th stage of consciousness. Actually, the Sanskrit texts say that till such time as you actually start questioning your existence and trying to progress from the first 2 stages of consciousness to the higher stages, till such time as you probe into your own spiritual identity, properly speaking, one is not a human being. One is not a human being because merely one looks like a human being morphologically or physically. One is not a human being merely because one can do things in a very sophisticated way, or one can utilize technology and science and economics and so on. According to the Vedic literature, a human being, properly speaking, is identified in terms of his or her evolved consciousness. If one's consciousness is evolved to the point of understanding one's spiritual identity, or at least that quest has begun in earnest, then properly one is called a human being. Because one wants to know, who am I? I met one gentleman some years ago, and he told me, I had heard this. I had come to some of the classes you people organize, lectures, and you people talk about who am I, who am I. It didn't appeal to me as anything particularly important. But one day I was crossing the road, and I was in the at this crossing, about to cross over, and that's when this feeling overwhelmed me. And I tried to look down at myself. I was seeing the people rushing hither and thither, and I started thinking, who am I? And who is everybody? And the feeling overpowered me in such a strong way. It was as if I was rooted to the ground and I couldn't move. And this question just overwhelmed me, thinking, who am I actually? Who am I? I looked at my body. I looked at my hands, and I felt my body. Is this me? Who is it that is actually seeing all this going around in this world? And he had a real existential experience there. And the first thing he did was he came running, and he said, look, I want to know who I am. Fortunate soul. Fortunate. Really fortunate. Because he had that push that came from within. I want to know who I am. It's not so easy to even have such an inclination, because the way the world is moving, it's getting so gross. Everything is getting grosser and grosser. Identity is more in terms of just the physical identities, immediate gratification. And any restriction on one's attempt to gratify oneself is not looked upon very favorably or kindly, even if it is self-imposed. What to speak of if somebody else tries to impose any restriction? But when one tries to pursue something at a higher level, one automatically accepts restrictions in life. When we come to the idea or the platform of accepting that actually I'm a spiritual being, I'm not this body. I'm not an Englishman, I'm not a Frenchman, I'm not an African, I'm not an American, I'm not an Indian or Japanese or anything of the sort. I am a spiritual being. I am an eternal spirit soul. My substance really is spiritual. And this is just an external covering, a tabernacle for my spiritual being. I happen to be here in this particular covering, and somebody else is in another kind of covering. And I distinguish myself from that person based on that external covering. But actually, we're all united on the platform of the soul. In the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna explains that this is a true symptom of a person who is in knowledge. Knowledge is interestingly defined in the Bhagavad Gita. Knowledge is not defined in terms of what degrees you've got from the universities. Knowledge is not defined in terms of your skills and abilities to manipulate things in this world, even if they are materials or technology or whatever. Knowledge is considered in terms of your vision, not the physical vision, your spiritual vision. Can you see beyond the bodily and the psychological levels of identity? And can you understand the ultimate underlying unity of everybody as living as spirit souls, as spiritual beings? Can we even go beyond the human species to see equality not just amongst humans, but even amongst animals, even amongst plants, even at the level of the bacteria? We are all spiritual beings. We are in constitutional position, we are identical to the bacterium. That's a little humbling, isn't it? That I'm no different from a bacterium from one point of view, but from another point of view I am, because in this frame that my soul is covered in, I can actually try to understand my spiritual identity, whereas a bacterium cannot. The body of the bacterium cannot facilitate such an inquiry, whereas a human mind and the human intelligence can. And if the human being doesn't utilize his or her bodily and mental and intellectual frame for such a pursuit, that is considered, according to the Sanskrit literature, the Vedic literature, as something very unfortunate. So when one realizes oneself as a spiritual being, one is in the Vijnanamaya Kosha, state of consciousness of realization of one's spiritual identity. But that's not where everything ends. One goes even beyond, and there's the ultimate final state of consciousness, which is called Anandamaya. Ananda means bliss. It's the state of bliss. Bliss not of this world. People talk of bliss normally. Well, when your football team scores a goal or wins a cup, you may feel I'm in bliss. But the next match that it loses, you're not in bliss any longer. Or when you have some really delicious food, you may think, oh, this is blissful. Or you may have some experience within this world which makes you feel really good. But that isn't really bliss from a spiritual point of view. Such apparent happiness of this world is temporary. It begins at some point in time, it ends, and it doesn't really satisfy you for long. But spiritual bliss is that which is unending, endless, which goes on and on and on. And ultimately, which makes you realize a kind of ecstasy, a kind of bliss that we could never have imagined in this world. A kind of bliss in comparison with which even the highest of worldly pleasures would pale into utter insignificance. Consider the highest material pleasure you've ever experienced in your life, through good food or anything. Consider that to be like a drop. And consider the ecstasy that comes in the Anandamaya state of consciousness as a vast ocean. That's the kind of contrast we are talking about. How does that come about? It comes about by understanding the context of the individual spiritual being. Just understanding I am a spirit soul is not sufficient. But where have I come from? Where has the soul come from? And how do I relate to other souls in this world? And where have all of us come from Is there a common source for all of us? Yes, there is. We may call that source the Supreme Soul. We may call him God. There is a source of everything according to the literature of the Sanskrit Vedic literatures. That one source that's common for everyone, that goes beyond narrow religious faiths, that transcends national, communal, religious boundaries. When we speak of that one supreme being called God, we are not speaking of a Hindu God, a Muslim God, a Christian God, because God is God, period. God is that one ultimate source of everything, who is spiritual. God is our source, and we have a relationship with that ultimate source. When that relationship is re-established, and there is a relationship of love and service between this individual spark, the spiritual spark that is the you and the me, with that one entity, supreme entity, that relationship, when revived, can give us a bliss that is so exquisite, that is incomparable and inconceivable to people who haven't experienced it. All the relationships that we find in this world are actually perverted reflections of the original relationship that we would have with God, by which we would establish our ultimate identity, our spiritual identity. I ask this question many times at talks that I give. Let me give you two choices. You either, first choice, have the proprietorship of the entire earth. Everything is yours. All the lands, the oceans, the rivers, the mountains, everything is yours. You are unrivaled in your proprietorship of the planet. But you're the only one living on the planet. Nobody else. Okay, we might give you a concession. You might have your pet cat or a dog, but no more than that. That's all you have. Nobody else. But you're the king or the queen of the whole world. Or the other choice, just be what you are. With all your happiness and distress, with all your trials and tribulations and challenges in life, whatever you are, whichever situation you are in. So be happy with that. So of the two choices, how many would rather have the first choice? Would you raise your hand, please? If you want the first choice. Nobody. What about the second choice? How many of you would prefer the second choice to the first one? No other choice, only these two. There you are. Why? Now, in this world, everybody has gone through difficulty. You may have had troubled relationships. You may have had broken relationships. You've had so many miserable experiences. You've had good experiences in life. But you'd rather have life as a package deal, even if it means having some misery thrown in for good measure, because you at least want to have some relationships with people. You don't want to be alone. So your sense of identity makes you belong, makes you want to relate to others. But if you're relating to others depending on your conception of identity at the first level of food or the second level of existence, then it's going to be necessarily compromised. The higher you are on this evolution of consciousness scale, the better you will be able to relate to other people, the healthier the quality of your relationships, the healthier the quality of your mind and consciousness, and overall, the better your state of wellness. So essentially what we're talking about is our identity is incomplete unless it's seen with reference to others. And therefore relationships are so important for all of us. I was talking to somebody some days ago, and this person was very career-minded. Or rather, maybe just like everybody else. And afterwards that person told me, well, actually I've realized that I need relationships more than my career, because my career is not going to give me happiness. I need to be with people who I can get along with, whom I like, because there's so much juice in that. But in work, okay, there's something there. I get money, I have a position, I have some facility, I have a view of London City. Well, that's all right, but there's something missing there. So the ultimate relationship we are looking out for is in the ultimate expression of our identity, and that is with God. When that relationship is taken care of, all other relationships will be automatically taken care of as an automatic byproduct. That is our ultimate dharma, the ultimate relationship or duty in life. And when that is revived, then whether it is our personal arena at home, whether it is with our friends, whether at the workplace, whether in the world outside, we will see everything become so much more wholesome. The relationships become so much more meaningful and deeper and substantial, rather than being just superficial. You see, when relationships are based upon the first level of identity of food, then is only quarrel, nothing else. I want, the other person wants also. So we quarrel and we break up very fast. At the second level, also it's not a stable platform for relationships in this world, because ultimately it's based on fear and insecurity. Therefore, I'm not really happy. I'm anxious. I want to defend. I feel threatened. However, as we move higher to higher states of consciousness, then the quality of our relationships will become more sublime. It becomes more sober, more stable. In the first level of consciousness, relationships between people, let's say at a personal level, may be based only on bodily attraction. You find the other person very attractive physically. And then we think, this is it, this is the ultimate in my relationships. I found the one I was always looking for. But because the platform is on the gross bodily platform, is very hard, it will survive. Very hard for it to survive. So therefore we see relationships break up very quickly in this world of all sorts, because we need to focus it more on something higher and higher and higher. And even when there is a sincere attempt to focus relationships on something higher, it is a challenge, because we're living in the world where everything is so gross. You know, in India, you have a tradition of arranged marriages. Of course, now things change. And people in the West couldn't just understand this whole idea. I mean, how can you marry somebody you don't love? Yes, it's a common mystery to people in the West. I met one gentleman when I was in Australia. He was an Indian gentleman who settled there in Australia for 35 years. He's 75 years old now. And he said, when I was married, now he's celebrating the 50th anniversary of his marriage. He and his wife are happily together, living together very amicably and with love and so on. He said, I've done 50 years of my marriage, but I want to tell you that the first time I met my wife, or I saw my wife even, was when I married her at the marriage ceremony. And there were others present, and they couldn't believe the years. For me, of course, it was not something unusual because I've been raised from that culture, so I know these things. But for someone who was not raised in that culture, they were shocked. You mean that's the first time you just met her? Was at the ceremony, the marriage ceremony, and you married her just like that? He said, yes. My elders chose my wife for me, and they knew what I want, what I am, and I was happy with that. I don't advocate that everybody should do that now. Tomorrow you may blame me, and you may blame the organizers of this program, and then I'll be in trouble tomorrow. So we do have to adapt to situations. I acknowledge that. So why the people can't understand today why relationships fail when there is apparently so much love, and how relationships sustain and love grows despite the fact that when they met there was no love. They never knew each other. How is that? Because there's a fundamental difference. I was discussing with some of our colleagues the other day. You see, in the rest of the world, generally the idea is that you marry whom you love, whoever you love, isn't it? You fall in love with somebody and then you marry that person. But in traditional Vedic culture, you love who you marry. You see the difference? How can you do that? How can you marry somebody you don't love and then love that person? Because the foundation of that marriage is not just physical attraction and lust. It's something more. It's something deeper. It's something higher. It's not just on the gross physical identity of myself. Oh, this is a very attractive girl, it's a very handsome boy, and we'll make a good couple together. No. When identities are seen at that lower level, then your relationships will be short-lived. If you're fortunate, they could continue and go on. And there are instances like that too, of course. But by and large, one observes that standards of judgment are increasingly getting lower and lower. It's becoming grosser and grosser, with the idea that everything has collapsed today, with the result that the institution of marriage has even collapsed and no one has faith in, or many people don't have faith in the institution of marriage itself because it doesn't seem to work. But the problem is not marriage. The problem is our approach to marriage or our approach to relationships, and more fundamentally, it is our problem with understanding our own identity and the identity of others. So long as we identify ourselves at platform 1 or 2, which I discussed, then there is always a great risk that our relationships will not survive. So if we want individual happiness, social stability, and international sanity, then we should try to move up the scale of spiritual evolution. Understand and relate to people on the higher identities, not on the lower identities. Then our relationships will be wonderful, they will be meaningful, very long-lasting, enduring, very satisfying. The moment we base our relationships on things that are lower, automatically there is disruption. Because the lower stages, the bodily stages of consciousness are associated with certain words like short-lived, troublesome, selfish, When you have negativities associated with something, there is no sustainability there. You want something to sustain, it must be positive. You must have positivity. And that positivity comes from our spirituality. And it can't come from other sources. So therefore, understanding our spiritual identity is really so crucial for us. It is so important for us to really come to terms with and try to internalize. Then we will see the quality of our existence become so much more sublime. So trying to develop, understanding our spiritual identity and developing our relationship with God, and as a consequence, automatically developing our relationship with others in a godly perspective, from a divine perspective, that will make us truly happy in this world. So thank you very much. I just realized I've crossed my time. I sometimes say half seriously that, we monks are like politicians. Once we get a mic, we don't seem to stop. We just go on and on. But I do recognize that we have a limitation of time. So I will leave the floor open for any questions. If you have, I will try to answer them. And before I do that, I also want to thank the organizers of the program today, and especially the entire series, the Corporate Dharma series. Thank you very much. You're doing a great job. And thank you to every one of you who took the time out from your weekday schedule to come here and be with us this evening. I hope my talk was not too philosophical. We are creatures of habit. I'm used to speaking philosophy, so try as hard as I might, I can't get away from it. It just comes in. So thank you very much. And I'd like to throw the floor open for questions now. Please raise your hand and you may ask the questions from where you are. Yes, please. Do we have a mic? Okay, yeah.
I was just wondering, how do we become more connected to this higher source in which we call God?
How do we connect ourselves to that original source?
Yes.
Well, that's what spirituality is all about, and that's what true religion is all about. Now, if you approach religion from this perspective, from the perspective that I talked about in the talk today, then it doesn't matter which faith you affiliate yourself to, so long as you understand these principles. And then you follow that path. I come from a certain tradition, and in our tradition we give a lot of emphasis to the chanting of the names of God as the principal way of trying to develop that relationship. And also hearing from the texts, the ancient texts, to get more knowledge, because we need to understand the subject deeper. So therefore we keep company of people who are similarly minded, who are spiritually oriented, so that we can get inspiration and guidance in the matter of moving ahead on this path. The scope of the talk today does not permit one to talk so much about it, but other discussions perhaps can help you. If you be in touch with the organizers, they can perhaps move you on further on this path. Okay? Thank you. Yes, there's another question there.
If I develop my spiritual identity and others around me haven't...
I beg your pardon, you'll have to hold the mic a little closer. Yes.
If I develop my spiritual identity and others around me are not developing theirs, how does that benefit me? Example, in
Okay, good question. The question is that if I develop my spiritual identity, but the others around me don't, then how does that benefit me? Oh, immensely. Even if others don't develop their spiritual identity, I need to develop mine because I need to deal with them. I have to interact with them. I live amongst them. I work amongst them. I travel amongst them. So I need to deal with them. And I cannot say how they're going to come across. I don't control their minds, but I can control my mind. So let's say there's someone who's rude to me, or someone who doesn't deal with me in a very good way. Now, if I'm not spiritually inclined, I would probably react in one way. And that may cause a lot of disturbance to my mind and keep me very, very agitated and unhappy. When I'm spiritual, then I understand what perspective to view this whole problem in. Then I understand actually it's not my problem, it's that person's problem. You see? When I get disturbed by the way how other people deal with me, effectively what I'm doing is I'm outsourcing my life to that person. I'm outsourcing my consciousness, my state of mind, my life, my happiness to that person. Because my state of mind and my happiness now depends on how the other person behaves with me. And I don't control that. In other words, I lay myself open to being controlled by the whole world around me. Whereas when I become spiritually realized, then I don't depend on that. I remain happy regardless of how others deal with me. Today someone praises me, tomorrow someone criticizes me, I'm equipoised. So I am happy in all circumstances because I am realized. That's our motivation for becoming realized at the everyday level. Does that answer the question? It helps us, it equips us, it gives us with the tools necessary to be within the world, but not of this world, to be amongst people, but not get affected by people and the way they do things and say things to us.
But how do you actually stop yourself then from becoming egotistical because you think you're above other people?
Okay, good question. How do you stop yourself from becoming egotistical? You see, part of the process, or not just part of it, but fundamental to the process of understanding and realizing your spiritual identity is humility. In the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna gives 20 indicators of knowledge in a particular chapter. And the very first one is humility, the symptoms of knowledge. It's quite different from how the modern world defines knowledge. The modern world would define knowledge in terms of information. How much information do you have about computers, about accounting, about medicine, about whatever else, economics perhaps, mathematics. But where do we have a conception that knowledge is understood in terms of your humility? That would be quite strange to people of this world. So when you become spiritual, you automatically become humble. So you don't become egotistical. You actually realize your position. So much so that even if people deal badly with you, you still love them. You don't bear ill will towards them. There's no rancor in your heart towards them. And you remain peaceful. You're still the well-wisher of those people. You don't pray for harm to come to them. The biggest issues in the world today are interpersonal issues, isn't it? And what are the things we get worked up about in life? Just two things. He or she said this, he or she did that. That's all. Am I right? So only two things in life we get worked up about. what somebody said, what somebody did. It's so simple. The whole world is moving around because of that. The entire problem of the world today is just on these two things. Because I don't like or agree with what somebody said or what somebody did. But if I become more expansive or become more broad-minded in my understanding of things, and I become deeper and spiritual, then automatically everything becomes so sublime and wonderful. Then real love can come. Otherwise, the so-called love of this world isn't really love, because there's a selfish element associated with it. But when I develop this attitude, then all these good qualities come in. The humility comes in, compassion, kindness, forgiveness, all that comes in. In relationships, we need forgiveness. If there's no spirit of forgiveness, no relationship can survive. Am I right? And forgiveness is the hardest thing in the world to get, to have. And that comes automatically when you understand your spiritual identity, because these are the natural qualities of the soul. Okay? Yes, any other questions? Okay, at the back, please. Or here, okay.
Thank you, Swamiji, for the wonderful talk. Very educational for a seeker. My question is, what are the qualities that we need as individuals to go up the Panchakoshas, to move our journey towards the Panchakoshas? Are there any qualities that...
Okay, nice. So what are the qualities, or what do we need to do basically to move up from a lower stage of consciousness to a higher state of consciousness? Yes? Something lower can only produce something that's on the same level or even lower. If you want to go higher, then you have to be with something that's already higher. In other words, you have to associate with that higher state of consciousness. How do you associate with a higher state of consciousness? By people who are in that higher state of consciousness or are sincerely striving to be in that spiritual state of consciousness. So when we keep company with such people, as opposed to others who might be on the lower platforms and want to remain there, then you will start moving up the scale. Then the progress will happen very quickly. Of course, fundamentally, we must also desire that. We must want it. Because these things can't be forced. These things are inspirational. They have to come from within. But even our desires often are based upon our company. You know, if you keep company of people who have a certain kind of desire and inclination, you also become like that. So the surest way to make progress is to keep company of people who have this inclination. Okay? Very simple answer. Yes, got a question there.
Thank you very much. Most people today, I've observed, have multiple identities. So there's 1 billion people with identities on Facebook. That's one identity they put out there. And when they go to work, they put on another identity. So you end up having many identities that you face the world with. How does one discern what the correct identity for oneself is? Which one is correct and which one do you discard?
It's like a set of clothes. You wear different clothes for different purposes. When you go to play football, then you wear one set of clothes. When you go to work, you have another set of clothes. When you go to a formal function, Let's say the Queen has invited you as a special guest to some function, and you go dressed in another kind of dress. So your clothing varies according to the purpose and the circumstances and the time. When you go to bed, you have another set of clothes. But at the same time, you always understand who you are. You never lose track of that. Yes? So similarly, if we understand our spiritual identity clearly, and we are based on that understanding, then we may adapt, we may wear different hats, so to speak, according to the need and place at a practical level. But that's only for practical purposes. Fundamentally, we know that we are spiritual beings. Let's say I'm a human being. Now, even though I know that the lion is a spiritual being, but I wouldn't go and shake hands with a lion. Yes, I will make that practical distinction that, I know that from a distance, and I keep a safe distance from the lion. So I wear my hat, that although I'm a spiritual being, but I have a human body, and that's not a lion's body, so I should be careful. So then I use my intelligence to understand what kind of hat I wear when, but I have to be rooted firmly in my spiritual identity. Okay? Is there any other question? Okay, there's one here.
Good evening. We are all, I think, on the same journey to spiritualism, obviously. Otherwise, we wouldn't be in this room. Association with getting to that stage. We might be at different milestones to get there. But what I'm trying to understand is spiritualism, obviously the top best, the biggest layer we want to get to. How do you actually associate that with reincarnation? For example, I'm thinking about Ramavatar. When he was born, he had all that things which God had. So how do you associate that? And different stages.
I think your question perhaps goes beyond the purview of this talk. Perhaps that's for another discussion, because we would go into completely another realm of discussion. Yes, so perhaps we can talk about that later. It wouldn't quite actually pertain to our topic for today. It'll go beyond. So if you don't mind, we can talk about that separately maybe. Is there any other question? Yes, at the back, please.
Hi, you spoke about the baby and wanting food.
I beg your pardon?
You spoke about a baby and
baby, yes.
And the baby wanting.
I have nothing against babies, by the way.
Of course not. The idea of identity is also seeking.
The idea of?
The idea of identity is.
Identity.
Is also the need for validation, seeking validation. A child looks upon its parents for validation. As we grow as young adults, we look for validation, but there's so much maya surrounding us. Facebook, validation, trying to look for outlets where we can formulate an identity and this sense of acceptance. So the idea of identity you're portraying is very selfless, but very difficult in today's world because we're surrounded by so much maya. So how would you encourage people surrounded by this need for validation, quick validation, in formulating pure identities?
Okay. So your question is that there is such a need that people have for validation, and they try to do it through so many different forums and methods, Facebook being one of them. By the way, Facebook, I don't think it's such a great idea. It's a great forum for validation. Rather, I feel it invalidates, if anything. It's the number one, not the number one, but it's a big factor for breakups of relationships in UK. You know that? I read the statistics somewhere. Someone who is better informed may tell me. I'm not an authority on the subject. I'm just sharing with you something I read in one of your newspapers here, by the way. So it said that some amount, an enormously high percentage of breakups are because of Facebook. Yeah, so if we want to validate our identity because of that, it ends up doing the opposite. The modern social media is creating, with all the good things that you can do and everything else, creating havoc in relationships. Havoc. You see people today walking everywhere. They're not looking at people in the tube, in the buses, walking everywhere. They're just with their machine. They'd rather associate and talk and look at somebody miles away than the person who's sitting in front of them. No relationships. People are losing relationships because of this. We're becoming increasingly impersonalized because we are letting technology take over our identity. We are now faceless. So Facebook is not Facebook. I'd rather call it faceless. We're faceless names. And we interact with each other and call each other soul mates. So faceless, nameless. We may have a name, but it may also be a pseudonym. And people interact on Facebook on all kinds of false names and do all kinds of things, and they break up. Many times I do have to talk to people who come and they want some counsel or advice about some relationship issue. And one of the commonest things that are coming up these days in different countries, not just in the UK, everywhere, is that my wife, my husband, my son, my daughter, so-and-so, all day is on Facebook. Doesn't talk to me, doesn't talk to anybody else. It's just all day doing something. Facebook. So, we have to come back to understanding ultimately this kind of neutral relationship with technology that we have is making us increasingly insensitive, impersonal, and therefore miserable. And we have forgotten what it means to relate to people, to have relationships, and therefore relationships break down easier now because you're so accustomed to dealing with some faceless, nameless gadgets, and that's all what you want, that we have forgotten those joys of just sitting together with people and just talking face to face. Yes? There are some religious communities I know of who don't even want telephone. There's a community where it's another religious faith, but it's very interesting. They don't like people having telephones in their home. And the reason is they believe that it makes things very impersonal. If you want to talk to somebody, you walk and talk. You go to that person's home and talk. Because it's so personal. You're meeting that person face to face and you chat, rather than just call. I had a gentleman tell me that his boss, who was just in the next cabin. And the next cabin, meaning it doesn't even have a partition that goes all the way up to the ceiling. It's just a partial thing here. They're just the next, table, but they communicate on email. Next here. It's going on like this. I couldn't believe it. I thought he was joking or something, but apparently it's quite common. And little things. Have you got that? No, I haven't got it. Thanks. We have to bring back people into our lives. Relationships. Identities. Come to a higher identity or the spiritual identity and relate to people on that platform. We shouldn't relate to people on the lower platforms. Your point is right, that in the midst of such heavy propaganda of the modern day world, which pulls us down to the lower two levels of consciousness, what does one do? So I come back to the answer I gave to an earlier question. It's two things: the company of spiritually minded people and knowledge. These two things. Thank you. Is there any other question? Okay, all right, yes. At the back, I think. How are we doing for time, Prashant? Last one? Okay. Yes.
Hi, one of the points that you mentioned earlier on was with one of the stages of consciousness, happiness over distress is something that we choose, or a more of a peaceful, calming way of leading your life is a human trait. But you hear a lot of people who they claim, or they like to claim, that they like pressure, they like stress. That's what drives them. Like, it's the enforcing of time restriction or something along those lines that's what fires them up. So is this a misconception of their own identity, or is it a certain type of person? How does that mentality fit into the stages of consciousness?
It's not so much about wanting some stress or pressure. It's about what you want to do as a result of that. What do you want to achieve? What's your purpose? What kind of activities do you want to do, and why? Where are you coming from? That's the crux, really speaking. Yes? So you may have a spiritual person who also operates on a certain platform where when there's a lot of pressure, he or she may do wonderfully well. But generally, if one is more spiritual, one doesn't need to depend on such external impetus, so to speak, to be able to function effectively. One is self-driven. One acts on a spiritual platform and doesn't need to be driven by external circumstances like that. Right? Did I answer your question? Okay. All right, thank you very much. You've been a wonderful audience. I didn't see anybody nodding off to sleep, although I did get a bit technical and philosophical at times. Thank you very much once again. Good night.